Good morning, everybody. Is it good afternoon yet? It's still good morning. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our first plenary session, and I hope that if you attended any of the parallel sessions this morning, that you had a good one. We actually had a fantastic presentations. I very poorly time managed, unfortunately, so we didn't get discussion. So this session, I am going to be really much better at time management. But welcome to all of you. Today's session is titled Power, Policy, and People in Africa, Putting People First. And we're going to have four speakers. I'll introduce each of them as they come up, but Gunasekaran Rangaswamy from UNODC, Maria Goretti from IDPC, Charity Monareng from TB HIV Care, and Mohammed Motala from NACOSA. So today we're actually going to, this morning we're going to be talking about well, I should say who I am if you haven't, sorry. Look, I'm running around like a crazy woman today. My name is Colleen Daniels. I'm the Deputy Director and Public Health Lead with Harm Reduction International, which is a global civil society organization. I've worked in primarily infectious diseases for 25 years, HIV, tuberculosis, malaria, hepatitis, most of the time with the World Health Organization, UNOPS, Stop TB Partnership, and a variety of other NGOs you might have heard of, Treatment Action Group in the US, Health Action International. I also worked a little bit with the Australian government and the Kingdom of Tonga in the South Pacific. But here today, I'm working on drug policy now at Harm Reduction International, and it's just really wonderful to be here and to see so many people. The first time I came to Drug Policy Week was in 2020 when I first started with Harm Reduction International, and it was the best education I could have received for getting me on top of all the issues in terms of drug policy. So in today's session, we are going to talk about the interconnected dynamics of drug policy, the influence of power, and the ongoing challenges in Africa. Today we will look at the global context, current policies, and real-world cases. And so we're hoping that this session will enable us to have a little bit more of a nuanced understanding of how these elements all come together and shape the realities on the ground. So to give you a little bit of background about the war on drugs and why we're sitting here today talking about drug policy, it actually started, the whole strategy on the war on drugs started when President Nixon began his administration in the United States in the 1970s. And he had two major problems when he entered office. He had the anti-war left, those who were against the Vietnam War, and he had the Black civil rights movement, both happening at the same time. And so and he couldn't make being anti-war illegal, and he couldn't make being Black illegal, though they tried for many years. And so instead what they decided to do, and it was a whole strategy, they sat down and they wrote the strategy, and they decided to associate cannabis with the anti-war left. And they decided to associate cocaine and heroin with African Americans. And in that way, they were able to disrupt the communities. They were able to imprison their leaders. It enabled them to kill the leaders and basically kill the two movements. And that's how the war on drugs developed around in the United States. And then together with Western Europe, they started exporting this strategy to the rest of the world, which is why people who use drugs continue to suffer at the hands of law enforcement, at the hands of our governments today. Because we very blindly took on these policies as if they were our own, as if they were something that we needed to fight. But we didn't need to fight the anti-war left, and we didn't need to stop the Black civil rights movement. So the question here that we're all trying to answer is, well, why the hell do we still have a war on drugs in South Africa, in Botswana, in Ghana, in Mauritius, in Morocco, in Africa? And it's because we allowed colonial institutions to remain, and we allowed colonial mindsets to remain. And so here in South Africa, when we changed our constitution, it's now one of the most progressive in the world. When we changed our constitution, we didn't necessarily change our colonial mindset. So we adopted a lot of policies, a lot of laws that actually don't work for us, shouldn't work for us because they work in an American context or they work in a British context, but they certainly don't work in an African context. And so today, and we know that this happened in the United States because John Ehrlichman, who was a former assistant in the Nixon administration, in 1994, he said, "We knew we couldn't make it illegal, but we needed to arrest their leaders, we needed to raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news," which is why today we associate people who use drugs as being bad people, right? And that's something that's become ingrained in our minds. Even though, and Gunnar will give you some of the statistics next, but we know so many people around the world use drugs. We know only a small fraction of them actually have a substance use disorder. But we know that many, many more people, they just enjoy drugs. Why can't we let them? We all eat sugar. We enjoy it. I mean, we get fat, but we enjoy it, you know? So here's the thing. What about bodily autonomy? Where does that fit into this power play and into these politics? Because I haven't heard any of that come up when we talk about drug policy and reforms. So we need to be able to move this forward. We need to be able to change our current global policy structure because currently it is based on oppression, it is based on subjugation, and it is based on aggression. And in fact, in many countries, anti-blackness has been the result. So it's anti-black, brown, and indigenous people. So any of us who don't look like President Nixon become parts of the targets of this system. And it's seeped into every aspect of our lives, into our laws, into our policies, our structures, and our belief systems, because now we believe that people who use drugs are bad. And so the use of drug control by states in Europe and America to advance and sustain the systemic exploitation of people, land, and resources, and the racialized hierarchies, which were established under colonial control, continue to dominate today. We just call it other things. It's called a government department sometimes. And yet, in the 19th century, psychoactive substances were among the commodities that colonial governments used. This was how the United Kingdom became rich. They actually went to war with China so they could control the opium trade. And yet 66 years later, the Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs of 1961 was adopted. And so in less than a century, drugs had gone from an essential part of European colonial trade to, in the words of the Single Convention, a serious evil that leads to personal degradation and social disruption. Now, I've worked in the United Nations for many, many years, and Gunnar also has. There are no other treaties or conventions that have a moral application. We talk about the right to health. We talk about the human rights. But in the Single Convention on Drugs, we talk about a serious evil. We talk about it's a moral perspective. It's a moral judgment that has been allowed to penetrate all our systems.